all of the marketers jumped in and were like, hey, AI cannot do strategy. I was like, it's not the AI cannot do strategy. You can't do strategy. You don't actually know how to talk to the AI and give it instructions in a way that would actually be helpful towards building a strategy. It can do strategy, but the AI will reflect your knowledge and ability to ask for output on that subject.
Welcome to the Product Tea with Leah. I am your host, Leah Darin, and we are about to spill the tea with the best from tech about product, growth, and senior leadership topics. Good morning, everyone. Coming in from Switzerland from a person who doesn't like to read intros, like myself, there is someone I love nerding out with when it comes to business and AI. And he was on the podcast before already. He's a marketer by heart, former CMO at Zapier, and now SVP Marketing at Hubspot. And more importantly, he is like me, interested in what AI really does on the retention side, so to speak, and not just acquisition and the flashy stuff that nobody really uses. Welcome to the Product Tea for the second time, Kieran Flanagan. How are you today?
I'm doing good. Good to finally make it. We tried to make it happen a couple of times, so I'm excited to be back on.
Exactly, because we're too important. You suddenly started as an advisor to your newborn, to your babies.
Exactly. I have a newborn who I'm on the advisory board for, so that's been taken up. She drives a hard routine, so that's been taking up a lot of my time.
Okay, yeah, but she's not driven by AI. At least her dad is a little bit, but we're not going to talk about your baby. So we're gonna start off with something lighthearted because I loved jamming with you around AI and so forth. And one of the things that I sent you over WhatsApp a couple of days ago was a video about a new kind of, I'm not sure whether it's an actual game that you can play now, but it was a very interesting kind of concept where you had 4 passengers sitting in a train and each passenger was a different model. So ChatGPT, Gemini, and so forth. And there was one human also in the train car. And it was a bit eerie because the goal of the game was for the AI to figure out who is the human passenger in the train. So they were asking each other questions and everybody was impersonating someone else like Cleopatra, Genghis Khan, that kind of stuff. And it was a bit eerie because the human did not stand a single chance. Not that he did a good job, but it was quite weird to see that we as humans had to kind of blend in with AI, like turning it around. It was really interesting. What did it do to you when I sent you this stuff?
There's a couple of things. So I think what's interesting is it does still highlight that a lot of AI, when it's allowed to kind of freewheel itself, the content is somewhat generic. Like the AI content is like very like averaged out to the most generic kind of output. But it does give you a sense of, I think you mentioned, we WhatsApped on this, you can't help but feel that in the future that you are going to have AI-driven social networks. And if you actually think about character.ai, character.ai for all intents and purposes is a little bit like the first kind of version of that, where you can go and create all of these characters.ai. You can actually go and train, or you can go and pick characters throughout time, cartoon characters, film characters, all of these different characters, famous characters, and you can have them as your friend, right? And it does make you think, like, I wonder in the future, do you have your own kind of social network tailored to your needs, but you are the only human in that network because everyone else is like who you want them to be, right? Like I want my network to be this kind of way with these kind of people and these kind of characters. And I will say I listened to a really good conversation with Andreessen and Harrods, I always get this freaking wrong, A16Z. Why can I never get it right?
It's a weird name.
Yeah, and so what I was listening to, like their kind of take on what apps are trending within AI, and the one that is like taken off is companionship. And that just reminded me of, wow, like we are going to see that happen. We're going to see that play out. We're going to see full communities with a blend of AI avatars and human avatars.
So this is an interesting one. There's like 3 different angles. So I'm going to forget about 2. So let's talk about the most important one. So you and me, we've talked about this like a couple of months ago. I don't remember anymore because time is a blur for you as well. It's probably how old your baby is plus like 2 to 3 months.
Exactly, yeah. A different era.
So we were talking about how things are changing in regards to how we interact with stuff. So we're thinking about, like, I guess that user interfaces are starting to become less important in terms of like how you retain stuff, right? And how we interact with them. And the thing that I'm wondering is that, so the other day I got laid off from a flight. Right? So like they just canceled my flight. I had to book a new one and I was already dreading the interaction that I would have because airlines are not exactly known for having good customer service because they're always optimizing on every cost. But me being an extremely important person, I actually had access to a chatbot that was rebooking me. Everything was kind of fine. And I didn't mind at all that it was a chatbot because it was actually really, really, really good. It gave me options. I could say, like, I want to have this and so forth. I was even in another country. I did not have to call the agent and so forth. So for me, in this regard, I actually preferred not having to go over a human interaction. Now, the social stuff is getting very interesting because I do actually think that in the future, we're anyways sensory animals, right? Like everything that we see is like from some kind of sensory input. Like, do you think we're going to head into a future where it's good enough, even if it doesn't imitate perfectly, but it's just, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you just don't mind.
So I think the way I think about that is, so the airline example is really good, where there's what happens when the cost of human capital goes to zero, or what happens when the cost of human resources in some cases goes to zero. Like, again, not all human resources, because like there's just certain skill sets that are hard for an AI to do today. But that's a good example where you have these kind of brands have terrible customer service. So anything that an AI can do that is above like nothing is like a much better experience. And if you apply that to social networks for people, if you actually look at some of the charts or some of the data that has been collected around like what's the biggest killer of certain demographics of people, it's like loneliness. And so in that case, like the AI can do a better job than nothing, right? Like for people who are missing companionship, for people who feel like they are isolated, for people who just crave someone to be there in all times and talk to, the AI does a much better job than nothing. Does it replace the ability, or does it replace like having like real friends that you can have true conversations with? It's probably not. But for a lot of people, I think it's much better than what we have today. The other thing is like, it just is somewhat easier. Like I wonder if humans will just default to the easiest like option. You know this from being in software. Humans will always default to the easiest thing, right? Like if it's easier to use, if it's less friction, then I'll use that. It's like less friction for me to go to a site and spin up 3 friends and maybe have to go out and try to like establish those friends and connections myself. And so there's a place where I think AI is actually really beneficial for humans to feel some sort of companionship, but I do worry that it's going to continue to make us much more isolated, right? And I don't think that's a good thing. And all of the data showing like the younger demographic, younger generation, there was a report recently around like 13-year-olds have like better relationships with their parents than ever before and less friends than ever before. And that is because we are getting dragged into a more virtual world.
Yeah, I think that's true. But what's also interesting is that this play that it does on the brand, right? So like if you have interactions like these, and let's say it is something commoditized that you know exactly what kind of value you're getting. I don't know. Like, so for instance, I was moving into a new house and I have to order all kinds of garbage around the house, new doorbell, new chairs, new this, new that, and so forth. And I know exactly what I want, but not the brand, right? Like I just don't care about the brand. Like I could describe what I want in some kind of way. How do you build brand like this as a company if you can use an AI, for instance, to make the buying decision? So this is an interesting one. So like, I can definitely imagine in the future that I could say, hey, search for hey, Google, I hope now my Google, let's just go off. Hey, Google, select, I don't know, the best pizzeria that is in town right now that is open and try to order me a pizza below $30 that does this and that. And I don't care about the rest because this is exactly also the buying decision that I would probably go through, right? Or the selective choice. I do not care about the brand. I will not see the logo. The only interaction that I have is with the driver, who is probably also not even from this restaurant. So the only way to actually form a brand is with the packaging that the food comes in. So I think from a marketing's perspective, this is super, super fascinating to me. I think it's going to still move a little bit slower. There's a lot of interesting stuff there happening. So I do think that also AI will take some of the buyer's decision. And that's a very intriguing topic for B2B.
Yeah, I have a ton of thoughts here. So two of the biggest, like two aha moments for me was the first time I saw ChatGPT, I was like, wow, this puts search blue links into the background because now you have an AI assistant that all it's really doing is going to crawl the links and then like format and concisely tell you the answer that's derived from those links. And now we are in present day AI. We have AI overviews. And that is an example of what you're saying, which is the kind of clicking around on the links is being moved in the background in favor of some sort of agent being able to just do that for you and then give you the answer. Now if we look at the release of agent or the AI overviews from Google and look at the performance of it, it's still not very good, right? It's still kind of capturing a snippet from a page and just putting it front and center. So it's really just scraping content. In some cases, it is stitching together content and giving you a pretty nice answer, but it's very hit or miss. And then the other thing that is like relevant to what you're saying is when I saw the demo from a company called Adept, right? And Adept were showing you what you're talking about. Hey, you can have a natural language interface on top of all of your software and just communicate with the agent, and the agent can do the work in the background, and you don't have to really touch the software. And again, that's a very future-looking world, not today-looking world. But I do wonder what happens when I think we have an AI agent layer on top of what we have had, the current existing internet, right? So it moves everything back a step. And then how do you build a brand when the agent is the assistant that's going to communicate with the software and do the tasks? And where I've started to really think through that is just the act of buying B2B software, right? So in our industry, I don't think anyone wakes up in the morning and goes, right, the thing I really want to do is get out there and buy some B2B software. Now, I will say I've actually started to meet some incredible people who are amazing at procurement. Like, how do I actually pick the right vendors? And they tend to be founders. And what they do is they go speak to the founders of this company, and they only adopt the tool if they think the founder is like a 10x founder, which I thought is a fascinating way to do it. But just at scale, no one really is like, oh, I want to go through all of the email nurturing, the demos, and all of these different things. Well, you probably don't have to in the future, right? If I'm an agent, I can set an agent off with a task. I can go to the websites that have, the product that is relevant to me. I can go through their emails and summarize those email flows. I can probably go in and do a demo at some point and actually summarize the demo. Does it have the features that I want? And so in that way, who are you actually creating a buying experience for, right? Like some sort of blend of agent and person. And it probably means that you have to kind of just format your things in a really easy way to understand, so an agent can like parse them, summarize them, and give the human the content they need to be able to make a decision.
I think we're further than this already. Like, I think we're actually super close to this. And I want to give you a very specific example. So let's say I have something that is happening in a conversation where I'm like, yeah, oh, I should actually share this with Kieran afterwards. Just as an example, right? And so let's say, I don't know, something happens and I have an AI that is capable of listening in. So like, I don't know, I'm using Whisper as an interface, whatever. Share this file or share this particular moment that I just recorded with my phone. Google already has access to my phone, and I also know that it has access to my files and so forth. Share it with Kieran over WhatsApp. Now, if the AI, for instance, says like, hey, the file is too big and so forth, then I can still say like, hey, it's fine. Just like find a sharing service and make it shareable for him easily.
Yeah.
The AI will definitely be capable in facilitating this, because all you need is like, you need to have access to the phone itself. Even if you do not have an API where you can access, language models can now start to navigate interfaces just like humans, because they can actually interpret the visual data and so forth. But the cool thing happens on the other side. Let's say you have a recipient AI in some kind of way that is managing all your inbound stuff. Then you could say like, hey, this link is not accessible. Can you give me access? Like these bullshit interactions that we always have. Hey, Kieran, look, I shared the slides with you. You click on it, you don't have access. Or for instance, like, hey, is my sound on? Can you see my presentation? We will have AI that is taking away these common these common conversations that we have to make sure that the information flow is happening. And AI is really, really good in taking unstructured information and kind of putting it together. This is why I'm thinking we're already quite close to this, much, much, much closer than people think. Because the $1 billion question is usually, how do I find something that I have been doing? Oftentimes, I do not remember where I sent you something, but I do remember whether I did send you something. So what I have to do is I have to go into Slack. I have to search like Kieran wacky video. No, it wasn't there. And then I go to WhatsApp. Oh, no, it's over there. Is it on email? That's the $1 billion thing, I think, where AI will be really good. It will finally aggregate all these shitty search engines into one, because it can structure these information flows.
This is OpenAI's long-term plan, I think, is to build the kind of personal assistant for your life. And the reason I think they went from browser ChatGPT to desktop ChatGPT is because the closer you can get to the hardware, the more context you can build. I do think people like kind of maybe rushed ahead with that's why they did that. I think that's why they did that, but they were, I think, explicit in the demo where they said this does not capture anything that you were doing on the laptop. Now, I think at some point they say, hey, now you can turn on capture things you're doing on the laptop and automate anything you do, which is kind of like the rewind, right? What they've tried to do, or Microsoft and I built that into their PCs. And this, I think this is where we're heading, which is everything that I do on a day-to-day basis is captured in some form by the AI. And I've always thought this, right? The AI engine, actually, like, let me give you the framework and then kind of go back into that, right? Because I think that if you actually think of building AI tools across like a 2x2, and for people on the YouTube, I don't know if you do the YouTube, but like I'll make the 2x2, right? So in one axis, you have differentiation high or low, and then the other axis, you have context low or high, right? And if you think where we are in the building of AI tools, a lot of them are in the low context and low differentiation, which means that they are building wrappers around the model, but all the model, everyone has the same access to the model, so the tools are all very similar. Where you start to see like tools really differentiate and become much more valuable is when you have unique context, proprietary data that you can build on top of, and that AI tool becomes much more differentiated, much more valuable. The thing that OpenAI I've always thought would want to do is like build tools that capture data so they have context about individuals, so they can fine tune specific model to a specific individual. That also means that my switching costs start to get inbuilt, right? If you want to build a great company, you want to try to figure out how can I build switching costs that are going to be really high for the user? Well, if I've actually spent the time to like train the model on me, and OpenAI now has like a specific model that's a great assistant to me, the likelihood that I'll want to go and start again with a new model is pretty low. And so I do agree that like we are going to move towards a place where I can just say to the assistant, oh, like I sent Leah, me and Leah have a podcast coming up. When was that? I can't remember. And did we go back and forth in email? I can't remember. And just give me the draft of what we're going to talk about. And that world, there is going to be no one happier than me, because I am incredibly good at my work and incredibly disorganized outside of my work, because I think one of the things we sacrifice, people who truly are, in the work and doing the work, is outside of the work, everything else is chaotic, right? Because you're so like obsessively focused. And the ability to just have an assistant do all that stuff for me is probably going to be meaningfully huge on like my productivity levels are going to be like 10x overnight when I can actually do that, right? So I think that is a very valuable tool that we're going to have access to.
I think this is very much on point. And I think it's also crazy because this is not a cost question, right? Like, so for instance, let's say I would have the best human assistant next to me that would cost me $50 a month. I don't know. This person would not outperform an AI because of the immediate access to the data and so forth. So I want to double click on this because I think this is the most interesting thing also for B2B. Like if you think about how do we expand, what's going to happen in the future. So in December, HubSpot announced that they were acquiring Clearbit. For me, this was a very clear play on this particular hypothesis that, yes, we need to secure the data.
Yeah.
Now, what does that mean? Just to double click again on like what you said. So I definitely think there are two scenarios that could actually play out right now. So the first one is, there was always this question of like AGI or like, can AI solve problems that it has never seen, like that it doesn't have an existing, like it just kind of ramps up exponentially. I also shared this with you. I'm not sure whether you've actually looked at the paper itself, but there was this paper in April about there's no zero shot without exponential data. So what the paper says, and it is a relatively thorough one, is that the amount of data that we need in order to achieve anything like this is so astronomically high, specifically for use cases that are very rarely represented in the data, that it's probably not going to happen with the current technological approach that we do have. So what does that mean? This means, by and large, we have already seen what AI can do. It starts to get a little bit better and more refined, of course. We also have new use cases. But the overall hypothesis is right now that we have seen already what AI can do in terms of, coming up with solutions and so forth, and how it processes all this data. Now, that's one thing. So for me, I think I'm on that train, definitely. But the second thing is exactly also what you said. All of these companies, they cannot monetize the model itself. It is really about the data. And this data means if you have the data and you can also intertwine it in some kind of way with the model, you have the retention that you need.
Right.
It doesn't matter actually whether you can process the data a little bit better if you don't have access to the data, because the bias, so like the error rate that is introduced into a model, is incredibly high if the data is not clean. So we will probably also have in the future services that allow you to give your data, and then you have humans in between that are doing some data labeling, train your own model. I could imagine this because this is a service that you can buy, right? So like you have not only like a Kieran assistant, but like the Kieran, the cleaned assistant,
right?
Like data that was been picked up wrong and so forth. So That's where this entire world is going. Not everything will be automated. There will still be humans in there and so forth. But it's absolutely fascinating. But I think this is also why I'm also like you on this train. The play for business is around getting access to good data also in the future, because the time where the internet was full of human generated content is over. That's the other thing, right? Like the synthetic data right now is going to take over as well.
Yeah, well, so I have so many thoughts on this. So like to start at the start and then go all the way to what you were saying. So I think, I made my career in the open web era, and the open web era was for the most powered by Google and advertising, right? Like 63% of all referral traffic across the web comes from Google. The reason we have an open web is because of the ability to advertise against all of this free content. And over time, we've seen us much more, step foot into the closed wall era where, the social platforms started to penalize you for doing links. And now like Google, I think, is the last bastion of the open web. As much as people hate them, I still root for them because they are the last kind of company hanging on to that open web. But even with their kind of move into integrating search into the platform, if you look at AI overviews and all these different features, they're moving to like, hey, how do I keep the traffic on our own website and have the AI experience completely within our own ecosystem? And so if you believe that, then we're going to move more towards the closed web. What happens in the closed web is data is infinitely more valuable, right? We've seen all of the partnerships that OpenAI have done. They've done the Atlantic. They did a couple others this week. We saw Google partnered with Reddit. I don't know if Reddit was the best partnership for their AI overview results, right? I don't know if you've seen some of these results, but the AI doesn't have the reasoning to say, well, that person shit posted on Reddit. They just take the answer and say, this is probably the answer, right? It doesn't like, oh, that person doesn't get shit posting.
Maybe before you continue, maybe we can really briefly explain on what happened there.
Yeah, so there was they launched AI overviews. It wasn't as bad as their image generation tool in terms of the complete nightmare they had, but they still had a pretty big nightmare. So they had people asking like, how many rocks should I eat a day? And the AI would spit back, you should eat at least 3 rocks a day. It was telling pregnant women to smoke 2 to 3 cigarettes a day. My favorite was, and hopefully I can swear on this podcast, was basically saying, what do astronauts do? And someone had written Reddit, like astronauts fuck, sleep, and drink, and then sometimes go to the moon. and so the AI is like, oh, this is like pretty reputable site Reddit. Here's the answer, right? Now, some of these were probably faked, I think people jumped in and started faking some of them. But the problem is like it's reasoning, right? AI had answers from The Onion, and The Onion is a well-known comedic publication, and it's like spinning back the answers from these publications. It doesn't have the reasoning to know whether these are being sarcastic or jokes, or are they actually the right thing or the wrong thing. And so in that closed web world, data is context, and context means AI tools are better. The paper you're referring to, you sent it to me. I watched the YouTube video, went through the paper. It's like, okay, we've hit peak AI without something meaningfully different in the kind of data sets we can train on. I think for a lot of companies, they haven't even extracted the value from the models we have because they haven't fine-tuned them in any kind of meaningful way. But I go back and forth on that. So sometimes I'm like, I see an AI use case, like I meet a founder or I see a tool and I'm like, boy, like I had an example I sent to you, a company that had an AI agent doing sales calls through voice. And I was like, boy, that is mind-blowing. And then I get my meeting notes summarization from my AI meeting note tool, and they're just so bad, right? Like, and I'm like, oh, how do I like get these two things right in my head? Here's one great experience I've had, and here's like a very basic use case, and the AI is not very good. And so it is, I think where I think AI is still really good, and we can get into maybe some use cases in the go-to-market, is when you can really constrict it, right? If you let it be very, like the AI transcription and summarization, and here's the follow-up points, is the example of where you give it a wide scope to interpret that how it wants to be interpreted. But if you can constrict it and basically restrict the output and give it like really strict guardrails, then it's much, much better, because it's still somewhat inaccurate. And Sam Altman said before they launched GPT-4.0, when he was talking about GPT-5, he says his hope for GPT-5, if you ask it a question 10,000 times, it gives you the same answer 10,000 times. Today, if you ask it the question 10,000 times, you'll get an array of different answers. And that's the problem with it. Creativity is a feature, it's not a bug, but that means that it's not accurate and it still hasn't got great reasoning. And so if you build with its restrictions in mind, I think you can be much more successful.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I'm always asking myself, like, if you talk to a model, you're kind of speaking to the average data set of the entire world that has been trained on, right? So, but like when I talk to you, then I talk to one person. Now, sure, you can also tell a specific model, hey, speak in the style of Kieran Flanagan. I don't know. But what it does is it takes like the common denominator and then it tries to kind of just style it a little bit like you.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that this is what you're also said. The other problem that I also have is that I've had a couple of people about a year ago, like when ChatGPT became a little bit more, more popular and so forth. I had someone use a chatbot that they trained on my data and then they sold subscriptions based on my shit, right? Like, and someone also flagged it and said like, hey, Leah, do you know about this? I'm like, no, I did not know about this. So I got a little bit scared there at the moment. But then I was like, wait, hold on. Like everything that I've written like 3 to 4 months ago is just objectively bad, right? Like I'm changing my opinions all the time. Sometimes I have also event creators or other people who are taking some of my stuff and they republish it under a new date, and then but they also attribute it to me, but like then there's a wrong summarization around it, right? So like I'm still the head of product at Jua, which I'm not anymore at all, and so forth. So data gets invariably dirty again. And this is why I'm not that afraid that as a creator that is staying ahead, like a company that is also continuously developing their opinions and so forth, that I will be replaced by AI. So I'm 100% with you as well. But I think people really need to kind of also remember that whatever you're training a model on, it is on a big kind of data set of something. So it will be an average. And unless the average or like the data that you're training it on, or like the majority of it is coming from you, it is not you.
Yeah.
It's just what it is, right? So
it's still an assistant. Like it's not, I think about writing, like was interesting with AI. We started with writing tools and I would have said that the writing the AI does was the last use case I would have started with because it just wasn't very good at the time. Now, over time, it's actually got much better. If you use Claude Opus as a writing tool, it's much better, but I would never ship the thing it says, right? I know how to use it and use it as a pretty great assistant. And I do think people still don't realize a couple of things about using AI. Number one, they give up much too fast, right? Oh, like their expectations are so high and they have a pretty generic prompt. And I learned this when I was actually in Zapier. We started to integrate AI much more. We interweaved it into the way that you would onboard and use Zapier. And it was much more like natural language interface driven. And so you could come and you could ask it to build you certain workflows. And when you would go through the prompt log, you would see that people just didn't know how to prompt, right? They would say, if you were trying to build a workflow to take your leads from Facebook and add them to your CRM, they would just say Facebook and HubSpot, right? Or Facebook leads. And so there's a disconnect between how people know how to prompt and like the AI can give you. And the second thing is you actually have to like really iterate to get to the good stuff with AI. Like I always think about the rule of 5 for AI. I usually will say, hey, like, tell me, I did this whole course on AI for marketers when I was on paternity leave because, hey, when you're on paternity leave, you shouldn't do this, but I spend it trying to do an AI course. And so it was like kind of this meta thing where I had this revelation where I was trying to fine tune Meta's latest model, Lambda, on my laptop. And I was like, oh, I want a course that basically shows me how to fine tune it and then build something based upon the fine tuning work that I've done, like a small light app. And I couldn't find any kind of course. And I went, wow, like, let me go to Claude and just see if it can build me a course. And it built me this course. And I had all of the things that I wanted in it, homework exercises, code examples. And I was like, wow, like, this is pretty amazing. So I took that and I said, I'm going to build a course using AI about AI. And I used a bunch of examples in there and how you can do advanced prompts. But the thing I told people to do is, let's say I was prompting Claude to write to rewrite a landing page in the style of David Ogilvy, right? And I would, what I did with Claude is what I did with ChatGPT is actually I built a book, like an ebook of all of the lessons of David Ogilvy with examples. And then I used that for Claude to tell it how to write or reconstruct the landing page in the style of David Ogilvy. But I would always say like, okay, first attempt, now refine, now give yourself areas of improvement and do it again. Or when I'm writing a post where I want a thought-provoking idea in that post, I would always say, okay, thanks for that. Now make it more thought-provoking. Next iteration. Now make it more thought-provoking. Next iteration. And I would do it 5 times. The 5th time you do it is way better than the first time you do it, right? Yeah. So you have to be deeply curious about the prompting and the iteration. If you don't do it that way, then you take to your point, you take the most generic result of a model that's giving you generic output. And you have to be clever enough to know how to give it instructions to refine it. I'll just end with this. It's like marketers When I put out something on LinkedIn about AI and marketers, it was the quote that was attributed to Sam Altman where he said, I think 95% of all a marketer's work could be done by AI in the future. I'm not sure if he really said it or not, but hey, it actually got tons of engagement on LinkedIn, which is cool. All of the marketers jumped in and were like, hey, AI cannot do strategy. I was like, it's not the AI cannot do strategy. You can't do strategy. You don't actually know how to talk to the AI and give it instructions in a way that would actually be helpful towards building a strategy. It can do strategy, but the AI will reflect your knowledge and ability to ask for output on that subject.
The number one reason why PMs, VPs of sales, marketing, it doesn't really matter, why they fail at building good business cases and which are the basis for any strategy in the end, is because they do not have the data at hand.
Right.
And there is no AI that is going to bring this to you. And I'm just going to say this really bluntly here. I have a lot of people who are asking me for advice on how to do this and do that, and they do not know the basic stuff about their own company. Mostly the founders and so forth, they do it, right? Like the CEOs as well. I have the expectation nowadays as well that if you're building something, you need to know how to sell it. If you're selling something, you need to know how it is built. There is no other way. You have to understand all this cross-functional stuff and not just like, oh, Gina over there, she's building the product. That's not understanding how it's being built. You need to understand how it is being used, how to interpret the product usage. It doesn't need to be a statistician, right? Like you can have AI help you also interpret stuff and so forth. But this lack of knowledge and then this idea that an AI can help you on top of this, right? So like just always like starting on a blank canvas and then just starting a little bit. This is really problematic. What I started to do as well, that I find very, very interesting, is to build on top of an AI with that I constantly use. So like in ChatGPT, I always use the same prompt because it also remembers, of course, what you did in there, right? So like I would like to have SQL queries written in the style that I like them.
Right.
There's 10 different ways on how you can do joins, like how you can combine tables, but I usually really struggle when the AI does it in a way that I do not understand because I join data different. Super easy to correct. It really is super easy to correct, but you need to sit down, right? Like it's kind of like people saying like, hey, I would like to learn how to swim, but I do not want to get wet. You still have some work to do.
Right.
But in order to kind of have this compounding interest that is coming from like optimizing 5%, 10%, 15% of your time, you need to spend at the beginning a little bit more time maybe. And this is where I see it, right? Like I use ChatGPT mostly for finding stuff in really big blobs of information that I cannot find otherwise, or like on repeating queries. I don't use generative AIs that much anymore, like for pictures, for instance, but for information gathering or like, hey, can you analyze? Like one of the most funny cases that I had last time was we got together for a board gaming night. I uploaded the PDF with the rules and I started to ask it rules about the game.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's exactly what you want to do.
Yeah.
That is exactly what you want to do. That's fucking amazing.
You've probably onboarded a lot of employees, right, to their role. Have you ever onboarded an employee and just said, hey, employee, now go do work, right? You don't do that. Like you give it context, you teach it what good looks like. You give it details about like very specific details about the thing that you want, the outcome you want. And then you like work with that person to actually refine the output and teach them how to do the thing that you want them to do. What people seem to expect with AI is it just knows, right? It's like, hey, yeah, go do incredible social media strategy, right? With no real context. And that's not how you should treat it because it's like a employee of a certain caliber, maybe like between an interim and like someone who's just started at a more junior level. And like you just wouldn't onboard someone by throwing them into the work without any real context and any real output. Like, but to your place, those use cases are great. Like I was trying to figure out a legal thing in relation to invest in, and I had a bunch of legal docs. Now, what I would normally do is like have to go pay a lawyer to just like read the docs, interpret the docs, and answer these 5 questions. I uploaded them all to ChatGPT. It was unbelievable. Like it told me exactly what I needed to do, give me an action plan, said, here's exactly the next steps for you. So there are these use cases that are just meaningfully different and can be life-changing when you stack them on top of each other. But there's still, I think, a gap between how people think they should use AI and how they use AI and their expectations around what AI is and what it currently is today.
That's 100% true. But before we riff too much on this topic, because I really wanted to get it also in like on GTM motions, because we've also been talking about this particular topic. So when we talk about go-to-market and AI, So we've been talking about always things like, where does the rubber meet the road? Like, what are the things that actually do work? I know you have some interesting thoughts when we talk about AI that actually supports your go-to-market as a company or like as an individual creator and so forth. Can you add a little bit of flavor on this? This is a conversation that we started relatively recently.
I think AI is really disruptive to how you acquire demand and really additive to how you convert that demand, right? So it's shrinking our ability to acquire demand, and that shrinking is coming from two real places. The best marketing channel that has ever been invented for businesses is Google search, in my mind, because you can create value, you can convert that value to website traffic, and then you can scale demand from that traffic in a very linear and predictable way. And then paid, which has become saturated. Now, I think search diminishes no matter what happens. The amount of traffic that we all get is going to be less because AI is going to cannibalize a lot of informational search. And the web is primarily made up of a lot of informational content. And then I think where the money goes is into paid, because now we're reliant on paid search channels much more, brings up the budget, increases cost per lead, and it's going to be harder to extract demand from there, which means you have to extract more demand or more value from the demand you create. And that's where AI comes into its own. So I think AI, if you go through that kind of post lead, first of all, I do think there is a place for AI in acquiring leads. Like what I see is a lot of companies are building on either they're like a clay, right? They're either a clay or they're like an Apollo ZoomInfo or an AI version of that. So they're either have a proprietary database of scraped the entire web of all contacts, and you can tell the AI, I need to generate X amount of leads, and then I want you to email the lead and book the meeting with the lead. Or a clay actually plugs into the data sources. It doesn't have the data source. I think the data source is going to be commoditized because everyone can build that proprietary contacts database, but what sits on top of it is an AI agent who can basically go out and start to like prospect on your behalf to these contacts. So there is like some up top of the funnel, but I think, it gets maybe commoditized quite rapidly over time. So someone becomes a lead, right? I think now you can give everyone a concierge type experience. So where I see a bunch of like cool startups is, we know the digitization of the BDR, right? That is a pretty apparent use case. And the way I would think about it is a lot of these, I actually changed my thought a little bit based on the conversation with someone who's doing great work in HubSpot yesterday. I had always thought that the digitization of BDR meant we would first of all start with the cold segment of your database. So the kind of untouched demand, and then you would apply human capital. You would apply AI across that because you would never apply human capital across that because the intent is too low and the unit economics wouldn't be in your favor, right? So the cold segment means that it has been unengaged. It sits in your database. It's not really engaged. Maybe it hasn't done anything in 30 to 90 days. Well, now I can have an AI agent like go out and email and prospect into that database. They can write the emails. They can do the research. They can try to book the meeting, and the meeting appears in the rep's calendar. What I've realized actually is they are very unresponsive to email, which makes tons of sense because they're an unengaged segment of your database. And actually what you have to do is call or try to other channels like social channels. And so the agent would actually have to be able to do voice. And we're still some way off consistent agents, like consistency in voice agents, right? We're a little way off there, but I have started to see startups that are building like really interesting things, and GPT's new model actually does a really good job on voice, so we get better there. And you can automate some stuff through social channels, and you have to be very cautious because it can get annoying. Then you have the middle part of your database, which is these are like good fit, somewhat engaged, and are good potential for converting into book meetings for your sales team. And that's where you can have a digitized BDR, do the research, craft emails, and actually generate demand for your sales team. That's like a pretty self-explanatory use case. The next case is then you have your sales team. It's like, how can I make that sales team much more productive? And I think the way you make them more productive is you turn your CRM into a much more like kind of smart agent, right? The CRM is a system of record historically, but reps don't like it because it takes them out of their flow of work versus being in their flow of work. AI transforms it to actually being a way to accelerate reps' productivity, right? We see a lot of startups being able to use AI agents to ingest data through all of the things the reps are doing through these external sources in very frictionless ways, right? So an example would be, the reps on the call. The rep is talking about a variety of different things. The agent can then go into the CRM, create custom records, and say, okay, they talked about customer competitors here. Here's the snippet. They talked about something else that you're really interested in. Here's the snippet. And it's all in custom fields. And this is a real example from a startup. that someone was taking me through. And then you can take those customer fields, spit them back out, create Slack channels, and the sales reps can subscribe to the Slack channels. So whenever they want the snippet around the customer intelligence, whenever they want the kind of pushback from the budget owner, whenever they want the data that they need to be more productive, it sits there in their workflow. But it's not all the data, it's the thing that's most applicable to them.
So that sounds really interesting. And are you saying that AI is supporting salespeople on the go? So what I mean is like also like in real time. So it doesn't matter, or it matters less about the actual timing. So whether you are having better scoring, you have better leads and so forth, but like while you are on the call, you also have better access to relevant data. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm so excited to answer this, Leah, that I decided to get changed my clothing for it. So, I had an hypothesis that AI would actually be really cool to create like a Grammarly for sales, right? So if you think about Grammarly was always one of my favorite PLG examples when I was really going through how to create product-led growth strategies, because I really love this is a slight tangent, but I think it's kind of interesting for your listeners. I always loved their upgrade motion where you would basically be writing, and in the right-hand corner, if you're on the free app, it's like, you've made 10 mistakes. You've made 20 mistakes. You are an idiot. That was me. Like I've made 500 mistakes. I was like a really cool upgrade motion. And Grammarly is like one of my day-to-day tools. I don't write everything I write is in Grammarly. And I thought there was like a version of that for sales where the app would be open as the salesperson is talking and in real time. And I can get into some of this of why coaching is such an interesting use case for sales. But it would be in real time, like listening to the call, providing cues, being able to tell the salesperson based upon what good looks like, how to navigate that call. I actually invested in a company that was doing something for that for sales. What I have seen since then is that sales do not like that motion. They think it's distracting. They don't like to get things in real time. It takes them out of their flow. And actually, they're much happier to get things after the fact. And so I don't know if that will change, but I have definitely seen a resistance to kind of do the real-time guidance as you're like on the phone doing the call. Now, there are a bunch of coaching AI use cases that I can get into, but certainly for like the real-time one, it hasn't worked from what I've seen.
I would say that I agree with this. So what I'm trying to kind of figure out is like if I had a trainer that gives me kind of tips on like how should I am in public speaking while I am actually public speaking, right? So I have a lot of filler words, so like so M's and ums and all that. I would love while I present to 1,000 people to hear like stop saying M. It feels like my mom is on stage and is just telling me what's going on. So I can kind of get that. What I find interesting with this though is that isn't it usually the case that if you are doing something wrong, so let's say you're doing fitness, like, I don't know, like even if you're an experienced person in fitness and you're doing something that you keep doing all the time, like deadlifts or whatever you do, like you just do it on the regular, you probably make the same mistakes more often than the other person, right? Like it's not about finding one mistake. It's more about reminding you until it's actually kind of gone. So let's say for a sales rep, it would be you're not talking enough. You're cutting to the deal too fast. You're doing this kind of stuff. And that's so for that, I find it quite interesting. And I used to have a device on the public speaking thing that I was attaching to the back of my neck, which is giving me a vibration whenever I start to slouch.
Oh, wow.
So that kind of works. And I feel like if the signal is simple, but the algorithm is precise in when it does send it to you, because then you're not getting flooded, right? So like while I'm speaking and I get this, I immediately kind of stand up. That I see as being kind of useful. So I could imagine that this actually works also through AI there. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think it depends on the profession. So sales are in general resistant to new software in a lot of cases. And I get it, right? Because the sales rep has to try to use every minute of their day wisely because they're held accountable to a target. And so the decision to adopt something new is a pretty big decision for a salesperson because it creates a new habit or a new workflow they have to create. So I always think the adoption curve for software is a little higher for sales, and that they have to really be convinced this is a thing that works. And I think the challenge with the real-time nudging is it's hard to see in real time if that is working or not. Like it's hard to figure out, like, is this like worth doing or not? And the other thing is that sales, for the most part, great salespeople, the reason that they are great, and definitely the reasons a lot of them think that they will be great, is because they do things differently. This sales rep is pretty interesting. Like what AI in a lot of cases is trying to do is ingest data find commonalities in good and then try to get everyone to like do good. And that makes a ton of sense. But if you're a sales rep, you're like, well, that just brings me to the average, because if we're all now doing the same thing, what's my leverage? Like, what's my
Yeah.
secret sauce? How do I become the top salesperson in the company? And so for the most part, if you talk to a salesperson, even if you're trying to get them to do lead score and like, here's the best person to ring, they don't always want to follow the tools and the recommendations they've been given, because they're trying to find what's my leverage against the rest of the team. Sales is a competitive industry. They're trying to beat their number. They're trying to be the best salesperson on that team. And so there's an adoption curve. And then there's also just the sales rep doesn't want to be bucketed into like the average, like do the same as everyone else.
I think that's fair. I had to smile a little bit when you said, like, why do salespeople think that they're the best or like that they're good in some kind of way? So I think actually that this is because, ironically, so sales hates product usage data. They do not want to do any statistics before they do have sales calls and so forth. But from all the functions, they're the most data driven when it comes to outcomes, because you attach a monetary value to it, right? Like every salesperson knows whether they're going to be promoted or being fired next week. They also start to do these funny games on like, like I reached my quota, so now I'm going to just stagger my deals into the next quarter. So I'm just having an easier time after this. And I find it quite funny, but I think this is more of an incentive problem that we don't have to get into right now. But it is interesting because I feel like it's just like you said, unless a salesperson or anyone in sales really understands how this makes them more money, that is a good quality, right? Like, because I know that, hey, every time I have to do some kind of bullshit process and I have to phone 40 deals through, and for all of these 40 deals per day, I have to invest 2 minutes of my time to fill something into another CRM, I'm going to lose 2 to 3 deals that I can call off. And that's a problem. So, yeah.
The best sales people, and I've worked my entire career closely with sales, and they're a profession that I have a ton of respect for, because you have to be incredible to survive in that profession. One of the best salespeople I've ever worked with, and an incredible founder, and luckily to still be in contact with him and get to talk with him a lot. But I remember how protective he was around his time and how he just like evaded bullshit. I remember being in a meeting with him, and he was sitting there, and it was one of these kind of like everyone was in the meeting for an informational readout, right? And I just think like in any company, there should never be a meeting for like information readouts, status updates, any of that stuff, right? It should just be debates, discussions, like all that stuff should be async. And I remember like 20 minutes, it was like a tense enough meeting. We were trying to like figure out a bunch of stuff in this product-led growth initiative. And then within 20 minutes, he just stood up and goes, this meeting is not worth my time. Just walked out. Like in a big organization, like it gets some, there's some flack for that. But I was like ton of respect. Like not enough people do that. And sales have to do that, because he's like, this is an hour of my time where I could be actually trying to help my team make more money, help actually do things that truly matter. And so I do think the thing that sales do react to, and I've seen it because when we shifted HubSpot from the kind of traditional B2B funnel to like a product-led funnel, we had to like retrain the sales why they would even want to sell to these product-led, product qualified leads, right? A totally different motion. It was all through product usage. We never used that before. And the only way to really do it, I think, to change sales behavior is to take a small like pilot, like a Tiger team, and like have them do it and then demonstrate results. And I think sales will gravitate towards, wow, like we could show that these were closing 4 to 5 times higher than a traditional marketing qualified lead at that time. And so to me, then if I'm a salesperson, I'm like, well, I can make a ton more money selling into these. And you want your sales team to be motivated by money. Like people in today's world think that's a bad thing. That's a great thing. Your salesperson should be constantly obsessing about how to make themselves more money.
Yeah, I'm still trying to kind of move away from this. And also I try to also take some influence over incentivization plans, which I find very interesting. So there was a very interesting episode on Mark Robert's Science of Scaling. His name eludes me, and he said that he does not have incentivization plans for his sales, even at quite big scale. I have to look up the name afterwards, but it was interesting because he was trying to also motivate his salespeople with more outcome-driven goals. So in the sense, so let's say you're going into a new vertical, and you're saying like, hey, okay, like we need to find some good buyers in there, and we need to also establish a new process. So instead of like saying, hey, you have this specific quota or like leads that you have to kind of get or grasp or whatever, he just said like, your goal in the next 2 weeks is, besides everything else that you do, you're going to go on 10 conferences. I want you to have attended 10 conferences of this particular industry where you're going to go to, and then we'll see what's going to happen. So I think it's an interesting debate. I'm still more on the train of, you need to have monetary incentivization. Otherwise, nothing moves in sales or not as efficient.
Nothing. I would love to listen to that episode, but I've always seen incentives create behavior.
Yeah, so I'm still also on this train, except for very, very early stage startups where I do think you should not incentivize anything because otherwise you're going to get a bad deal into your site. So, I mean, all of this is very, very exciting. And what I did not expect to happen, actually, like if we look now into the past year or two where AI really started to get a grip, is that sales is probably profiting the most from AI right now in a very tangible kind of manner. And when we started to also talk about our episode on like what we are going to talk about is like we're always going to be talking about where the rubber meets the road, whereas like what actually works. So we're not in the hype. We have companies where we have some kind of influence and we are really interested in what works. So what pays money back? And for sales, I see a lot of cases that are right now materializing, not just from outbound optimization. I'm really talking about how to close a deal. On the other side, so classical product-led growth teams, where you talk about optimizing funnels. So we're taking the MQLs and then we're trying to optimize how much of these deals are going to qualify afterwards or are going to make money with us. I see actually less happening. So one of my hypotheses was that machine learning is going to dynamically optimize packaging, pricing, all these things. And I actually do not see it happen right now. For some reason, they do not tend to work because the personnel and the political problems that we have in companies, like an optimizing teams, should this person work with this one and so forth, tend to have much, 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 much more leverage right now still than any optimization. Because the problem for these machine learning algorithms is that they still need to have a big enough data set to play with.
Yeah.
And that did not happen yet. So a product needs to be also stable for a long enough time so you have data to train on and then have optimization recommendations. And it just did not materialize yet. I don't know whether you have an opinion on this one, but I find it very interesting because I have to do something with all this traffic that marketing brings me. And so far, yeah.
Yeah, like there's not enough experimental, like you'd have to run an incredible amount of experiments to be able to fine tune a model, to be able to have that model start to, basically, if you had an AI agent that could dictate your experiment backlog, right? Like, or could tell you the next best experiment to run. Yeah, I think that you have to capture a mammoth amount of data. I think on the product-led growth side, I do wonder if one of the places we see innovation is on the onboarding side, because that is the hardest thing, I think, about building a PLG business, is trying to get someone to activate and then to actually have some sort of recurrent value, like weekly active user or team, or get them to do something repeatedly. Like if you look at the stats, I think it's 60% of all software apps, or 60% of all users log into a software app and then never come back, right? It's really, and it's going to get worse because we're just overrun with software. I think Benioff had a really great point in his latest earnings call for Salesforce, where he called out AI as actually a force for friction, where it's clouding users' minds because there's so many different AI apps, they're not even sure what software to pick anymore. And so that onboarding is probably going to get harder and harder as things get more competitive. And there are some like interesting AI innovations that I think could be really interesting there. So the thing I was obsessed about, we covered it in our podcast when it came out, was this thing called Hume.ai. And you've probably seen it. Like, it allows you to do sentiment analysis. It allows you to do human voice. For the listeners, it's a chat widget that sits on the right-hand side. But it's basically, it was released prior to GPT 4.0. And this is why it's really hard for these startups, because what they had really nailed was the ability to have a human-to-human interaction. You could interrupt it. You could have a conversation. But it's not just the conversation. It was the fact, if you actually really trialed it, and I did, it can navigate you around the website. It can say, hey, I don't need to go like look at the top nav and see where I navigate myself around the website. It basically would say, oh, like, let's bring you to this page. And then it would scroll through the page and say, hey, like, these are the things you should care about. And I always think about like, okay, well, what's a part in the customer journey that today is like fundamentally broken, right? Like, that we know it's broken, but the human cost to fix it is just too high. Or it's just an unfixable problem prior to AI. And one of the ones I think does exist is everyone would be much happier if they could have a guided tour, a personalized guided tour by a human of the software. Like, if I could just sign up the software and have a human via on chat or on the medium that works for me quickly give me the 10 to 15 minute run through of the product, show me the things that I need to see, and then I can say, oh, it's for me, it's not for me. I would be a happier software user rather than having to go through all these tool tips and all of these different flows that we've come up with. But you can't do that because the cost of humans is too high. Like actually way back when we first did product-led growth at HubSpot, we were really struggling to move the activation metric. And one of the experiments I spun out was this thing called user success coaches. And the user success coach was really existed to gather data at that time, which was basically, it was way back to 2016. So it wasn't like a common thing. When you come into the app, the user success coach, where were 5 people we took from support, would pop up in chat and then try to discover what you wanted to do in the app and then onboard you onto the thing you wanted to do. And the reason we were doing that was to gather data to feed back into the product team to be able to build and perfect the onboarding flow. But people were much happier. A lot of people were happy going through the chat, right? But the unit economics of that was too high.
Yep.
And over time, that actually became a pretty big team within HubSpot, but it's like a BDR team, a digital BDR team, tries to surface up demand for the sales team and works really well. But in today's world where the cost of human capital in some cases for certain use cases goes to zero, well, now you can actually have this unmet need for users that exists. And now you can actually use AI to actually facilitate that. And I think that's one of the use cases where this is the other point I'll make that might be interesting for people. The way I think about things is like, that's one of the use cases that AI is not good enough to do that today, right? It actually is not good enough to do the entire chat, to navigate you around the tour in a very like personalized way, right? In terms of the software. And I know there's companies like Adept and these other companies trying to do that. Apple's latest release, they have Siri walking you through apps, right? So to me, that is a use case that will get solved. That is going to be something that exists in the world. And if I'm a company, I probably want to build towards that. And then when the new models come out, just start to plug them in. But like they're the use cases that I'm most excited to solve for, because I think they have a huge impact on the overarching customer journey.
So I agree on this. And also to add some data to, well, not really data, but like the typical thing is if you go into customer success or customer support and you ask like, hey, so what is the usual problem that our prospects and customers have? It's usually always 80% of the same shit.
Yeah.
And so while I agree with you, and that's also true, and we have had really good success also with Intercom, teaching, like and using some of these bots to really drive down the actual customer support tickets. So this is not just a reduction of cost, but I know that if I don't have to get someone on the phone, that this also improves my conversion rates, like of customers discovering something. However, whenever something like this happens, this is also sometimes an excuse for product teams to leave their product shitty because they know they can rely on the chatbot. So that is an interesting thing. When does this become not a workaround and when does it become an actual feature? And the one thing that I want to see more companies do, and I do not understand why they do not do this, please use Whisper or any AI that can take voice input where you can say, hey, I don't know what to do. I click on it and I say, so how can I now add this song to my playlist? Or whatever, like just the basics. While a language model might not be able to solve everything, you're absolutely right. It can at least identify whether the question is around something that is very, very common or whether you have to be referred to a customer success agent. Why does the customer have to decide whether this is a phone call or whether it's a chat issue? And that's the thing that I'm still struggling with kind of understanding. And I feel like we can do much, much, much more in that regard.
Yeah, I think there's two things there. It's really interesting you said that. When we were first doing PLG at HubSpot, the engineering team really did not like the kind of like direction of, hey, we have to build onboarding flows and activate users. And they were just like, no, we'll just build great software. And I actually think that's a really good place to start. Like actually, to your point, better that than like we'll build pretty crappy software and really hard to use and we'll just use AI to help navigate around it. So I do think that's going to be a solved problem. I think we are 100%. I don't think there's any debate that every software product will have an AI assistant of some sort, and that AI assistant will be fully functional across email, voice, and video. Like video as well is going to be a solved problem in 12 or so months. You're going to have a ability to have your avatar, virtual avatar. Like you'll have a personality for your AI assistant. It will be an avatar. It will be able to come back with a video walkthrough. It will be able to come back with a chat if that's what you want to do. It will be able to send an email. That to me is like going to be a solved problem in the next 12 to 18 months.
I'm not sure, man. The simple problem that I have is that I change my opinion every 2 months on like what I should say. So the data set is not there to have a good personality. It will be interesting though. I should have an interview like, I think it was Andreessen, right? Like that had an interview with himself.
Reid Hoffman. Yeah. I've seen enough to suggest that it is like maybe when I say 12 to 18 months, it will be the most sophisticated companies with the most amount of capital to deploy something, like not the average medium-sized company. I just see too many problems getting solved very rapidly to imagine that like you can't have a version of the AI agent which exists through text today, which is trained on your knowledge base, not be a widget that sits in and can be like a virtual avatar.
No.
And can basically, if you say, oh, okay, well, do you want me to follow up with email, personalized walkthrough? I just don't see that not happening.
I don't know. Like, I'm not on that train, but what I do definitely see is that email is going to be dead quite soon. Don't know how it's going to happen. That is a big, big statement for me, but it's going to happen. And
dead as in people won't use it anymore?
It will dramatically change. When I say dead, I always say, I don't mean that Google is dying, for instance, when I say like SEO is dead. That's not what I mean. What I mean is like it will fundamentally change more than 50%. I don't know, like something is going to happen to this particular revenue that's going to come from there. Same for email. I just think that the case that it solves right now is inter-company, between different company communication that is already solved in Slacks in some kind of way, not ideally, in Teams in some kind of way. But again, if you have AIs at some point, why can't you have an email that is connected with a Slack of someone else? So it doesn't matter whether I answer by email and you answer with Slack, because AI will translate the inputs from one, like the API connections will be much, much, much more crazy. That's my big bet. So we'll see what's going to happen, Kieran. We'll see. All right. Cool. This feels like we've recorded almost 2 episodes. So
there
Kieran,
you go.
Amazing.
Change of clothes, 2 episodes in one.
Amazing. People who are listening to this podcast do not know what we talk about. Kieran, should people get in contact with you? Do you need more deals? Do you need more AI? What do you need? Is there anything that you need?
No.
Good.
You can sign up to my newsletter if you like this kind of content, kieranflanagan.io/newsletter. That's basically it. Yeah. That's the best way to stay connected. I'm on LinkedIn. You can come follow me on LinkedIn. Marketing Against Screen podcast. Come listen to that. But they're all the ways.
Cool. Good. Then you are dismissed. And that's the end of this episode. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you.
Boom. Thank you so much for listening to The Product Tea with Lea. If you don't have enough yet, you can subscribe to my podcast right now on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you can head to my website, leatarin.com, which is leahtharin.com, where you can find much more of my material or just want to work with me.